The Jewish Living Podcast is brought to you by Margaret Tietz. Margaret Tietz Nursing and Rehabilitation Center in Jamaica Hills is a 5-star, fully kosher facility under the VAD. Established in 1971 for the care of Holocaust survivors, community needs has always been their mission. Mostly private rooms, valet parking, a beautiful courtyard garden will all make for a comfortable stay. Amenities for the body and soul include superior short-term rehabilitation, long-term and hospice care, daily and Shabbos minyanim, a full-time rabbi, Shabbos elevator, entry doors, and a Shabbos apartment. The Margaret Tietz Erev connects with all the surrounding Frum communities. For more information, please call 718-298-7829.
The Queen's Jewish Link presents the Jewish Living Podcast, the show that examines the many facets of Orthodox Jewish life. Here's your host, Izzo Zwirin.
At the center of the Jewish community is the Beis HaKnesses, or the shul. It's where we as a community gather to learn, to socialize, and most commonly, to daven. On this week's edition of the Jewish Living Podcast, we delve into what goes into leading davening. From weekday to Shabbos to Yom Tov, we discuss nusach and song selection with someone who spent much of his adult life thinking about all aspects of davening for the Amud.
My name is Meir Davis, and I am the recently retired chazzan of Congregation Kehilath Jeshurun, otherwise known as KJ, which is actually the largest Orthodox synagogue in New York City.
Meir will share his thoughts on the importance of nusach, how to choose melodies for davening, and how to get into the correct mindset of being a Baal Tefilah. All right, so thank you for joining us. So could you tell me a little bit about your background? I know your father was a chazzan, and any other familial links?
Yes. First, I succeeded my father at KJ. My father was there for 17 years. I was there for 30 years. My father was brought up as a child in Yerushalayim, where he learned nusach in the Zalman Rivlin choir in Yerushalayim. Eventually, my father became the first person ever to make nusach records to teach people how to teach balei Tefilah all over the world how to daven. And people, indeed, all over the world learned how to daven from my father.
And he passed that on to you?
Passed it on to me, but it wasn't just on my father's side. At one point, when I davened for the first time, when I was 17 years old, for Yom Tov, I was one of 7 people in my family who davened. I had both my grandfathers were davening for the Yom for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and 1, 2, 3 uncles were davening. So it's kind of in my upbringing, and my mother was also very musical.
Oh, all right. So is there any other background information we should know about you?
I also studied at Cantorial Training Institute at YU, but mostly I really picked it up, I would say, from my father, from my family. There really was one cute story. My father, I was very fortunate to have him by my side at KJ for 20 years when I succeeded him, and hear him say week after week, "Meir, you're a master," when he really knew better. But he also said to me, "Really, I have no idea how you learned how to daven like this, because you were never in shul."
That's great. Okay, so let's get a little information out of the way. What is the difference between a chazzan and a Baal Tefilah?
It's a good question. I would say in the late 19th century, early 20th century, mid-20th century, Jews were used to hearing what they called the star chazanim. As my father used to say, in the earlier days of Eastern Europe and Western Europe, Jews were prohibited from going to secular concerts, and so really their source of spiritual enrichment was from listening to chazanim who were artists, and they got their spiritual enrichment from listening to them. And it really was, in a certain sense, more of a concert experience. That started changing interestingly enough, really, I would say in the 60s and 70s, with the advent of really, actually even earlier than the 60s, probably with the Young Israel movement, which started to shy away from hearing star chazanim, and some of whom were not particularly observant, but who were gifted at doing what they did. And so it became more of a democratic institution where it was encouraged to lead davening, to have regular lay people lead davening. And people started using more popular melodies. So in certain ways, what the Young Israel movement did was very good and it was very vibrant. But in other ways, when it became more democratic, I think some of the standards changed, and it was really more hit or miss in terms of people getting spiritual inspiration when they were going to shul for davening.
There are going to be very few chazanim listening to this podcast. More likely it's going to be Baalei Tefilah or people that just go to shul and don't daven for the Amud. So we're going to focus the rest of the interview on more Baalei Tefilah related questions, less on the chazanis side of it, but more things that chazanim can do to improve their davening, more things that chazanim could be aware of as to why we do certain things, and more things, and when I say chazanim, I mean Baalei Tefilah,
Right.
and more things that people who aren't davening for the Amud can understand about why there are certain nusachos in certain areas, certain tunes are used in certain areas, so that they can maybe have a larger appreciation for what's going on up there.
I should say, before we go further into it, it's sort of timely that we're discussing this now, because in the last few months, a very fine chazzan named Sherwood Goffin passed away. I think both Sherwood and myself were among those who were not considered, quote, classical chazanim. And they, in a certain sense, Sherwood, and I tried to do this as well, tried to do an inclusive davening. I don't mind telling you that probably the compliment that I got the most over the years, whether I davened at KJ or at the various Pesach programs I went to, people used to say to me, I hate chazanim, I hate chazanas, but I like you. Which I actually took it as a compliment, because, and this is how I'm going to start answering your question. I think that your Baal Tefilah, your Shliach Tzibur, when he's up there, has to be very cognizant of the people who he is leading. On one hand, you want them to have kavanah. There's a specific reason that people really should be going to shul, aside from getting together with their fellow Jews, their fellow congregants. You're trying to get some sort of spiritual connection with God. And the job of the Shliach Tzibur, as I see it, is to include them as much as possible to really create spiritual moments, but to create spiritual moments in ways that they want to sing along, they want to daven, that they want to close their eyes and make a connection to God. And so the job of a good Shliach Tzibur is to, I think, first of all, be as inclusive as possible, to create the special environment through the use of nusach and melodies that they know to create that spiritual environment. And I think that means that for whoever's davening, and I don't think everybody should be getting up there to daven.
I agree.
I think it may be somewhat of a controversial thing to say, but people know it. Just because you have a yortzeit doesn't necessarily mean that you ought to be leading davening on Shabbos or Yom Tov, because your job is to be able to spiritually inspire everybody else, and not everyone is equipped to do it. It's not a qualitative statement about the people who have some sort of obligation to daven, but everyone has different skill sets. And if you feel as if you're not musical and you can't inspire them in some sort of way to get people to daven along with you, I think that maybe that's not where you ought to be going. I realize, again, that's somewhat controversial, but I believe that very strongly.
Okay, so let's get into the nuts and bolts of davening for the Amud.
Okay.
And for our listeners, we're going to be focusing for this part on the Ashkenazic side of things.
Correct.
This is not going to be necessarily, if you are Sephardi and you are listening to this, or Hasidic and listening to this, something that you are familiar with. It's still nice knowledge to have, but we're going to be focusing on Ashkenazi davening and minhagim and nuschos.
Okay.
So let's go with some of the mistakes that you might see being made by chazanim, by the shliach tzibur.
Okay. First of all, I'm a bug about nusach. Aside from the fact that Ashkenazic nusach goes back many, many centuries, really to the Maharil, back to, I believe, the 14th or 15th century, which they called Sinai tunes. You want to preserve what's been within the Ashkenazic tradition. You want to preserve what's been going on for centuries. That's number one. You want to include. You want to use the nusach as much as possible. A question that really needs to be answered is, what is nusach? Aside from the technical term of what nusach is, nusach creates a specific mood by using a specific mode. The layperson who sits in shul, theoretically, my father, Olav Shalom, used to talk about if you were coming from the planet Mars and you walked into shul, but you once knew what nusach was, you ought to be able to walk into a shul and by whatever that shliach tzibur is doing up there, by hearing what they're hearing, they ought to say, oh, it must be Shabbos. Oh, it must be Shalosh Regalim. Oh, it must be weekday. And the nusach, utilizing the nusach, creates a specific spiritual mood. So that when you hear, for instance, this melody, da-da-da-da-da-dum, ba-da-da-da-da-dum, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-dum, dee-dee-da-da-da-da-da-dum, ba-da-da-da-da-da-da-dum, you would think of Tikanto Shabbos or Yismach Moshe b'matnas chelko. So when you hear that, that's what it is. If you hear a, let's say Kaddish is a good illustration of that. If you hear this melody, Yiskadal ve'yiskadash shemei Rabbo, that actually is the appropriate melody for Chatzi Kaddish when the Torah is being completed, the reading of the Torah. It is then. So you know when you're hearing that, that's it. If you hear this melody for Kaddish, let's say, Yisgadal, somebody walked off the street and they're familiar with nusach, they say, oh, it must be Geshem or it must be Tal. If you hear Yisgadal ve'yiskadash shemei Rabbo, it's Nila. If you hear Kaddish is a very good illustration of it. If you hear Yiskadal v'yiskadash shemei Rabbo, amen, you know it's Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. So the nusach tells you something about what that davening is. There's even a nusach for during the week, and as you would think, that nusach would it be elaborate? Would it be fancy? What would you think?
I think it would be more plain.
It would be plain and simple, and for very practical reasons. People during the week, on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday, they've got to catch a train. They've got to go to work. So it should be, number one, it's a weekday davening. It should be simpler, but for practical reasons, it should be simple as well. And so when you hear it, it ought to be there ought to be a difference there too.
I would imagine that during the week you have not necessarily somebody who has the ability to daven for the Amud. You have people that have yard site that you mentioned before.
Yes.
There's people that don't have the vocal chops to do something very extensive.
You don't need something as elaborate or as vocal, but believe it or not, and most people don't have this correctly, but even here in Young Israel of West Hempstead, where I've been davening for a long time, there have been people who've been utilizing the subtle changes in nusach that start after Pesukei Zimra and go to the Brachos, Birchos Kriya Shema, that's a different nusach. And why should that nusach be different? Because we're getting to a different part of the davening. It's not fancy, it's not elaborate, it's subtle, but it's a difference. And you can see the difference in even people's kavanah, because the geula portion of the davening during the week and the Amidah, that is the central portion of the davening at that point. The Pesukei Zimra should be simple, but there ought to be a subtle difference that changes the feel of davening. We're getting into, and the brachos before Kriya Shema are also are talking about the heavens. It's getting us ready for Kedusha. We're dealing with the Malachim. And so it should change. And so there is a nusach for that, and it shouldn't make any difference in terms of how long it takes to do it. It's a subtle change, but it changes the feel of the davening at that point.
So what would that transition sound like?
I'll show you. At the beginning, let's say we know the brachos for Pesukei Zimra at the very beginning. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher nasan l'sech v'vino l'achim b'yom v'layla ashrei yosvei v'secho zelu chaselo tilas Hashem yidaber pi. Very simple. Da-da-da-da-da-da-dam. At the end of Oz Yashir, V'alu Moshiim, it's still part of Pesukei Zimra, but it's the end of that portion. So you change the nusach there to the brachos before Kriya Shema, and it goes like this. Remember we did before, Yochid Chelim Melech Mishmoch V'Ades V'Agel Baruch Atah Hashem Melech Mulol Batishmochos. That's that nusach. V'alu Moshiim would be this. V'olu Moshim B'Artzion Lishpos Es Harisov V'Yisrael Hashem Amlucho V'Yoshem Melech Al Kol Haaretz V'Yomo Hashem Echod U'Shemo Echod Yishtabach Shimcho La'ad Malkeinu Brachos V'Odos Me'ezov Elam. It's different. And even the kavanah of the daveners is going to change. And believe it or not, at this point in the 7 o'clock minyan, for instance, here in West Hempstead at Young Israel, and even at the 8 o'clock minyan, I'd say 30 to 40% of the people davening have picked up on that change, and they're doing it. And sure enough, more people, their own kavanah changes. So nusach makes a difference.
Okay, so let's get into some of the Shabbos and Yom Tov areas. Again, before we get into the actual concepts of when to pick nigunim, but in terms of preparation, now sometimes you walk into shul and the gabbai comes over to you and says, "Hey, can you daven shachar? Can you daven musaf? Can you do this on a regular Shabbos?" Sometimes you have a little bit more time to prep. I know that happens to me sometimes, but every once in a while I have nothing to do. I'm driving to work. I'm walking to shul. I have nothing else to think about. Sometimes I'll just think about what songs and what things can work. So what do you do for preparation? What do you do in terms of understanding the tefillos themselves and things like that?
So, of course, obviously, if you've been told a week before, a few days, or even a few days, or even the day before, spend time. Don't take it for granted. As the shaliach tzibur, you have a job to do. So that means review. Do you know the gist of the meaning of the tefillah? Do you know that? Is the melody that you're going to be appropriate, number one, to the nusach? And that really is important. And is it appropriate to the particular tefillah? If you got to, Rosh Chodesh benching, all right? There's someone I know who said, I want to get people to sing along with me. And I really want to get them to sing. So there is one particular person who said to me, use this melody. It's a perfectly nice melody that people sing along. I think it's totally inappropriate to that particular tefillah, because I approach, for instance, that tefillah, if I want to use a melody, I want to use a melody that reflects what it's talking about. I happen to approach a melody for Rosh Chodesh benching almost like Nisana Tokef. I quietly close my eyes, I take a look, and I know that on this side of the shul, there's someone who's having difficulty having children. On that side of the shul, there's somebody who's having parnasa problems. On another side of the shul, there's someone who's having trouble having, children or is ill. It doesn't mean it has to be somber, But people have all kinds of hopes and dreams tied into that tefillah. So it shouldn't be necessarily sad, but it should be a little more of a serious melody. It might be, Achenu Kol Beis Yisrael. Yehi Ratzon Milfanecha. So when you think of a melody, number one, think of a melody that's going to be appropriate to the nusach, to the particular piece that you're doing. And very important, also don't be so innovative that you pick something that you heard last week that you and 3 other people know, because then you've defeated the purpose of getting people to daven along with you. So don't be so innovative or so creative that no one's going to sing along with you.
So let's delve into that a little bit further. Is it ever appropriate to go solo? You pick a song that you know that it's just going to be you, but you think it fits the right tone that should be set.
I think if you're an extraordinarily talented singer and you can pull it off, but you've got to be, I think, really an artist. I guess, these days, in a lot of these shuls, they bring in outside talent who are gifted with great voices, and if they can pull it off, fine. But that is not what's happening either in Orthodox shuls, by the way, or conservative shuls, or Reform shuls. It's changing all over the place. People want to be included. They want to do more of sing-alongs. In terms of where the direction of communal davening is these days, people want to sing along. So I think unless you're an extraordinarily talented singer, don't do it.
One of my pet peeves is tircha de tzibura. So if you're on the other side, so first we just did one where picking the right song and picking the wrong song and sticking to the nusach. Earlier you mentioned that somebody said that they don't like chazanim and they don't like chazanis, but they like you. How much of that do you think falls under the tircha de tzibura label?
A lot. I think when you're up there, keep aware of your pacing. You want to create a spiritual feeling, but don't schlep. If a lot of people are looking at their watches, you've already lost. I'll say, for instance, there are those who love chazanis, and there are those who, when they get up there, they're, I think, too much about themselves. And if they feel as if they can, they can throw 6 or 7 or 15 notes into one syllable, they'll try to do it. And there's your choice when you're doing, let's say you're doing Shacharis Shabbos morning, right? You could do Brachos v'odos me'atov v'adolam baruch ato Hashem kel melech gadol batishbachos kel haodos adon haniflos habocher b'shirei zimra melech kel chei ha'olamim. Or they could do Brachos v'odos me'atov v'adolam baruch. By then, you've already lost them, because probably 3/4 of the congregation is already looking at their watches and say, okay, this is going to be a long morning. So if you're up there, you have to do the balance between engaging them and having the congregation want to daven with you and showing off your voice. It's not about you. It's about you have to be very cognizant of tircha de tzibura. Among the things you have to think of, for instance, when I was a chazzan in KJ, or even in some of the hotels, I davened both shacharis and musaf. And one of the reasons I did both at the hotels, for instance, was I wanted to be able to control the clock. I was aware that the dining room is going to be ready at such and such time. You have to keep in mind, is there a scholar in residence this Shabbos? Is it also Rosh Chodesh benching this Shabbos? Are there 3 Sifrei Torah this Shabbos? People don't have patience. So the trick is to be able to make it a meaningful, beautiful davening where they can concentrate on communicating with God. And by the same time, you have to do it in such a way that people don't start looking at their watches and say, I want to do a breakaway minyan.
Okay, so let's get into the actual specific nusach or areas of davening where I think our listeners might have some sort of a vested interest in knowing more about. So let's talk about Kedusha. So there's different, I know that we have Shachris, Musaf, Yom Noraim, Shalosh Regalim. We have all those different things. Let's start with Musaf on a regular Shabbos.
Okay. So the classic nusach for, let's say, Musaf Kedusha on a Shabbos, and for that matter, on Shalosh Regalim as well, is you lead up to it. Whatever melody, it's a continuation of Kedusha in a certain sense of the mood and the mode that we did up to that point. For instance, before Mechayim Mesim, Baruch Atah Hashem Mechayei HaMesim. That's the world we're in. So technically, in terms of the nusach, you should continue that mode and that mood. Mechayei HaMesim. So in traditional melodies, the real right way would be Mechayei HaMesim Naritzcha. It continued. And I'm talking about old melodies. You can do other melodies too, but Kivodo Moleyolam Mishoros of Shoalim Zeloze and Mim Komo. Let's say another traditional melody was Mim Komo. So in a strict sense, if you were doing the right nusach, that is in a major key. Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Velokei Avoseinu Nari Yischa V'Nakdishcha. That's all in that mode. So technically, that would be the more correct way. Now, most people these days are not doing that. What they're using is popular melodies as a concession to the congregation and what people want. I have changed occasionally what the classical nusach ought to be, and maybe I'll do it instead of in a major key. Let's say, and this is not a contemporary melody, but it is a minor melody that people know. The Hasidic festival, Yedid Nefesh. I use that as an example. But what I think is more effective is that you would continue with the next melody for Kevodo. Korozel Zeveyomar, Kevodo Molei Olam, Mishoros of Shoalim. So once I decided I'm departing really what the real nusach ought to be, but I want there to be a thread, not just for nusach purposes, but for the world that we're trying to put the olam into, for those purposes. So let's say we did for the first part that Yedid Nefesh melody that I just started doing. Nari Yischavenat v'Korozel Zeveyomar Kevodo Molei Olam Shoros of Shoalim Zelozer Aye Mekom Kevodo Yumason Baruch Yomeru. So for Mimkomo I might do Mimkomo Yifen Berachamim. It's a different melody, but it's in the same world that we tried to create. What I believe very strongly in is, and that makes it a more effective davening, is try to place the olam into that world and let there be a flow. I try to do the same thing for Hallel as well, that there's a nusach or there's a melody, keep it consistent. So you would do maybe from Naritzcha to Kevodo to Mimkomo, maybe to Shema also, maybe. For instance, if you did, again, it's not strict, but if you're going to break the rule, make the rule that you're breaking consistent. Create a flow, create a mood. So let's say I just did that Yedid Nefesh. Part B. Part C. Now, for Shema, I might do Shema Yisrael. But at least what you've done is you've created a flow in terms of the mood. And so you want to carry that across to everybody else. And I think even though you're making a concession by not doing the exact nusach mode, at least you created a particular mood, as opposed to, I will admit, one of my serious pet peeves, which is a kumsitz hootenanny, where you just come in with I like, as I put it, on top of Old Smoky for Na'aritzcha, or I put in Ata Tokum for Kavodo, and I like Ani Mamin for. So what you've done is they may know the melodies, but it's choppy. It puts them to a different world. Remember, Kedusha is supposed to be about sacred space and the Malachim. So whatever mood you're doing or creating, create it consistently. That's my feeling. Another thing you should think of, there's always, people knew, for instance, when I davened, there was always some sort of theme to it. And the theme might be a musical theme, meaning that consistent thing that I just did with Yedid Nefesh. Or if it's Yerushalayim, do Yerushalayim songs. But if you can do Yerushalayim songs that flow from one to the next. And this should be very recognizable to everybody, that there was a reason that you did it.
So a friend of mine once described the randomization of picking songs for davening as putting your iPod on shuffle and picking out exactly whatever comes up first.
That's a great example, and it's true. It's look, I'm more of I'm known by people who really know me well. I'm known as a purist.
So you don't like the designated hitter?
They're particularly designated hitters that I don't like. No, but I'm a purist from that standpoint. I think nusach is not just for traditional reasons, and not just for reasons of maintaining the traditions that go back many centuries. I think it's also a question of creating that particular spiritual mood. And so that means, and from that standpoint, I'm still a purist. I will only use melodies, I made reference to it before, in Chazoras Hashas, in Tikanto Shabbos, Yismach Moshe. If I'm going to include a congregational melody, and if the hour's late, maybe we won't even have time for congregational melodies. But if you're going to include a congregational melody, also include a congregational melody that fits into the mode that you're supposed to be in.
What was a congregational melody?
A melody that's a sing-along. Let's call it that. All right. That sometimes you want. Again, sometimes people say, "I want to be out of here." Look, there's a whole school of thought of young people who like what we call an efficient davening. I think efficient is good. I think for an accountant or for someone on an assembly line, I think davening should be not just efficient, but it should be meaningful. But again, don't be there all day. In terms of creating the mood, let's say we're in Chazor Sashas, we finished Kedusha, and you still want to move things along. So you're doing Tikanto Shabbos, Rotziso, etc., etc. So if you're going to include, let's say for Yismechu, you want to include something that's going to get everybody revved up and excited and wanting to sing along. So I wouldn't do melody that doesn't fit into that mode either. So literally, for instance, when I get to Yismechu from Tikanto Shabbos, you could do the old traditional one of Yismechu v'malchus Shomrei Shabbos, Tikanto Shabbos, that fits in. Or a more contemporary Hasidic melody, which is, remember we're in the Tikanto Shabbos mode, so we might do Yismechu v'malchus Shomrei Shabbos, Koreoneg, Mekadesh Shvi, Kulam Yisbeu Vizango Mituvecha, Uvashvi Ratzisavo, Baruch, Ato Hashem Mekadesh HaShabbos. Or if you can use a melody for Sim Shalom, you're in that mode, So you do Yivarecha Hashem ve'yishmerecha, etc. until we get to Yosem lecha shalom. So I wouldn't do Sim shalom tovo vrocha. Why? It's a very nice melody, but it takes you out of that world that we're in. So, Varecha Hashem ve'yishmerecha, Yo'er Hashem panav elecha v'yichuneka, Yisa Hashem panav elecha, V'yosem lecha shalom, Sim shalom tovo vrocha, Chen v'chesed v'rachamim, Baruch atah Hashem. So you try to choose a melody that fits into the particular nusach, the particular spiritual mood and mode that you're in. Now, I realize that's not easy for everybody. And by the way, in the list that I put together for things to keep in mind when you're about Tefilah, believe it or not, I've been doing this at KJ, there's more than 30 years. But in the last few years that I did it, I prepared more than ever before because I wanted to really be prepared and to be able to make it something that will include everybody and that it both fit into the rules that I just discussed and that will still involve everybody as much as possible.
You mentioned earlier about having some sort of a theme that goes through Kedusha, whether it's Yerushalayim or whatever have you. Often people choose something from that time of the year,
right.
Whether it be like let's say in Kislev you took a Hanukkah theme or a Purim theme or a Pesach theme or let's say a particular Parsha Shavua has a bunch of songs.
That's right.
What happens if there's a bunch of songs from that time of the year that don't connect to each other musically? For instance, you can have a Pesach theme that includes Dayenu, at the same time have it also include a Chasal Siddur Pesach or V'hisha Amda, which do not really mesh together.
I think then you say for yourself, the thing I want to emphasize now is the Yom Tov that's coming up, and you say, okay, try to connect it as much as possible. There's sometimes I reject this melody because, again, I don't think it's the mood of what I'm trying to create. If I can't, then I'll, Hanukkah, we don't have that many songs like that. But people know, in my shul, they used to wait to say, I wonder what the theme is going to be. And sure enough, I did it sometimes. Again, it was right. Sometimes the parsha. If the parsha is Hamalach HaGoholasi, then I'll use those melodies. I do a kedusha that is nothing but Imesh Kachech melodies. But again, that's easier to pick one particular key and go all the way through.
Okay, let's move on to Hallel. I know there's a particular favorite topic of yours. It happens to be my favorite thing to daven. I sit next to people in shul who can't stand when people use the same old nigunim during Hallel. The same Hashem Zechon Yivarech Espeis, B'tzeis Yisrael Mitzrayim, and Moshiv Hashem. Those are really nice songs when you're first starting to daven, and I still think of them as nice songs, but they're overdone. Mm-hmm. So what are acceptable substitutions during Hallel?
First of all, I'm not necessarily right about this, and some of those in the cantorial profession disagreed with me too, because remember, I'm a self-proclaimed purist. So the nusach for Hallel is signaled by its beginning, which is the bracha, which is their variations, but basically it's Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech olam asher kidishanu b'mitzvosov v'tzivonu likro es Hallel. It does not be that. It could be fancier, it could be less fancy, but that's the basic nusach. Whether during the week on Rosh Chodesh or Shabbos or Yom Tov, that's the nusach. So I choose, and again, it's I think probably just me. I may be the only guy like this. Some of the chazanim didn't agree with me. I say, okay, folks, this is the world we're entering right now. Now, it so happens that mode that I just described or sang to you is a minor mode musically. We have more melodies in minor than almost any other kind of melody. We may, off the top of my head, I put together a list of maybe 250 melodies, but there may be 500 melodies. So all I ask for somebody when they're leading it is pick a melody in minor. So you don't have to use the old traditional ones. One of those that I've been utilizing lately is I try to listen as much as I can. Today, you can listen to YouTube. You can listen to plenty of places you can listen to music. And there is probably more musical talent out there than ever before in the Hasidic world, in the Orthodox world, and in worlds other than Orthodox and Hasidic. People are using all kinds of melodies. So you should try to be on top of who the popular singers and popular songwriters are and try to utilize them as much as possible. For instance, in Hallel, both Shlomo and Eitan Katz have been doing a lot of wonderful melodies. Chabad has wonderful melodies, and Carlebach has wonderful melodies. Of course, Carlebach has not been around for a while.
Yeah, none of his songs are contemporary.
However, but they sure are holding up. And people sometimes, as a matter of fact, don't even realize that they're singing a Carlebach song. I remember I heard this Odi Shama, that Odi Shama B'Yare Yehuda. I didn't realize it was Carlebach, and Carlebach wrote that too. Amazing. But Eitan Katz has done a lot of very popular melodies too. So he has his Elul Nigun. That's a minor melody. So you can do Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam likro es hallel b'tzeis Yisrael b'Mitzrayim beis Yaakov meyam lo'eis. That works beautifully, and it has that whatever that hook that people like.
It's a simple melody that everybody jumps
right. into,
and it doesn't go too high, it doesn't go too low.
That's right. Now, for instance, another one is known as the Chabatsker Nigun, which is it's very good for Hallelu. It's also good for probably Yivarech. And it's more contemporary, and you can use it. But all I ask is that stay in that same mode. And the reason I do that, again, is because when you use something like, let's say, also a Carlebach melody, it's a great melody, but listen to the bracha for Hallel. Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu mitzvotav b'tzivonu likro es hallel b'tzeis Yisrael mi. Where does that come from? Out of left field. So there are enough great melodies in minor, but you have to work at it. You got to prepare. If you do that, again, don't pick something obscure. Pick something that you're reasonably certain that 75% of the people know, and so you'll get them on your side.
The other composer that's music still holds up today is A.B. Rottenberg.
Sure.
A lot of his stuff, and I just want to throw him out there because he is the person who allowed us to use his music as the theme for our podcast, and he's one of my go-tos for almost anything.
I have a whole folder of A.B. Rottenberg right here. A.B. Rottenberg melodies. For instance, Achenu Kol Beis Yisrael, V'li Yerushalayim Yircha, Shalom Shalom Rav, Shalom Shalom Rav. Ani Ma'amin Be'emut. He was very gifted. Yeah. He was very gifted. And by the way, Carlebach's gifted.
He still is very gifted.
Right. He's written some wonderful melodies. And it's great to use new melodies. But again, just because something is an old melody doesn't mean it's a bad melody.
Sometimes, depending on the crowd that I have, I'll throw in one of his songs from Journeys. One of his English language songs that people like.
By the way, look, Carlebach, my father used to say about Carlebach. Carlebach, I've written songs too. Carlebach, if you've written songs, you might say to yourself, it's so predictable. You say, any yold can write this, except his gift was, and it was really quite the gift to have, is, my father, Olav Hashem, used to say, his nigunim hakten kop. You find yourself walking in the street and you can't get it out of your head. That's the genius of someone who can make an accessible melody. Eitan Katz has that. Shlomo Katz has that. A.B. Rottenberg's melodies are beautiful. They're a little bit less predictable. but they're beautiful melodies, and people relate to them very, very well. Yeah.
So let's transition straight into final topic of Kabbalah Shabbos, since we're talking about Carlebach. Now, there's basically two schools of thought in the Litvish Ashkenaz world for Kabbalah Shabbos. There's the traditional Kabbalah Shabbos, and then there's the Carlebach style Kabbalah Shabbos. So I was wondering if you can talk a little bit, maybe give a little bit of background on either one of those two.
Carlebach, probably strictly, he had a very good background in nusach. He really did. His, let's say, Lechuner Anno, which Lechuner Anno, very, very nice. Is really, the truth is that probably is correct nusach. It fits right into that mode. Look, the followers of Carlebach, and it ran the gamut from hippies to yeshivas. They were into spirituality. And for those who are into spirituality, there are those look, you can go into any particular community, whether it's West Hempstead or it's Woodmere or it's Brooklyn, wherever. People want different styles. Certain people have patience. Some people want a quick, efficient minyan, which is their prerogative. And there are people who want to have spirituality, and they want to have a longer spiritual experience, and they don't mind doing it. So really, Carlebach's nusach was not necessarily that different. It was longer. It was longer.
Yes.
So he sang a Mizmor LeDavid, and instead of just ending the paragraph, he would come in with different melodies throughout, and it would be a longer davening.
So it would be kind of the same rules as we mentioned before. Once you're in a space, you try to get something that continues that space. So, and it would be the similar type of thing. Even if you're doing a theme for Lechadodi, you want to keep that theme going the whole time.
So, for instance, I'm a bug about that too. The purist in me says, let's say Lechadodi. It's interesting. Someone had mentioned to me a long time ago. They asked a question. Lechadodi, why does the melody change at Lo Sevoshi?
Is it because people got bored?
Yes. Yes. And the person, it's very interesting that I'm bringing that up now. Unfortunately, today was the levaya of a quiet giant in Jewish music, one of the most important and influential people of the last century. And he's a man named Velvel Pasternak, who lived in Woodmere. And Velvel Pasternak was the first person to really notate contemporary popular Jewish melodies, Hasidic melodies, popular melodies that hadn't been written down. And he created a whole business, a publishing business, writing down easy, what they call in the Jewish music business, or in the music business generally, either lead sheets, or some people call them cheat sheets, where he would write down just the melody line on top, and then on top of the melody line that he would write those notes, he would write what the chords are. And so he was probably very, very instrumental in popularizing all over the Jewish world, all over the world, Carlebach melodies or Muzich melodies. He was one of the first people to record Muzich melodies, Bubver melodies, Chabad melodies. He was one of the first people to do those records. He passed away today at 86. And he was a very interesting guy, but he was very, very influential from that standpoint. When non-Jewish bands, if they have to play From Wedding, the only song they knew was Hava Nagila, and he was the first guy to do that. And he wrote down melodies all over the world, and he was very much responsible, I think, for the popularization of a lot of these melodies.
And how does that relate back to Lechadodi?
So thank you for reminding me. So generally, one of the questions when I'd have a question like that, about what's the source of this melody, or how come. He was an ethnomusicologist. He really studied the sources of a lot of these things. He wasn't perfect with it, he says, but he did loads of research on Lecha Dodi, and the only thing that he could come up with, why did they change it? He said, it's a lot of stanzas. And at a certain point, people just got bored. And that's what happened. So, if you're going to change that melody too, the purist in Mayor Davis says the same thing. If you're doing the first part of Lecha Dodi, let's say, let's say you're doing Karl Bach. Let's say you're doing Shamar v'zochar b'diborecha ishmeyanu, or David Melech. Let's say you were doing ay 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 lecha dodi, ay 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 likras kala, ay 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 penei Shabbos, ay 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 nekabela lo sevo shive. I would go from one melody to another. I just changed melodies. David Melech is David Melech, right. Melech Yisrael. If you think, actually, this is a great way of thinking about it. Do you ever, all of us go to weddings, we go to chasnas, we see simchas and simcha dancing all the time. I think one of the best ways to try to learn these, go follow some of the bands. I know people complain about they're too loud or whatnot, but see some of the sets they put together. How one song seems to flow to the next song. You're doing a set of a certain kind of feel, and you see how they create these groups of songs that flow from one to the other. Try to create that same flow if you're switching from the first part of Lecha Dodi to the second.
Right, the classic Lecha Dodis kind of have that flow. When you're going from Lecha Dodi Likras Kala into Yom Da Da Dum Dum, kind of
doesn't flow at all. Doesn't flow at all. What do I mean by that?
Okay.
Lecha Dodi Likras Kala Penei Shabbos Nekabelo Yom Baba Dum Bum Bum Baba Dum Bum Bum. We just went from New Jersey to Wisconsin. So, I would say, I happen to like that Yom Baba Dum Bum Bum Bum. I might do the first part, let's say the Iboneh HaMikdash, or let's say I do David Melech Yisrael. Let's say I did, let's say ay 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 lecha dodi, ay 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 likras kala, ay 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 penei Shabbos, ay 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 nekabela, yam parlam papam parlam pan lo sevo. You want it to be smooth, and not only that, if you can. Instead of, sometimes what happens. It's happened to me occasionally, but not often.
You blank. It's a hard transition to make because it's...
So if you're going to do a transition from one part to the next, think beforehand, practice it in your head before you get up there, practice the transition, and see that it's a smooth transition.
So what I usually do in that case is I'll finish up the end of Hisodari. I'll just finish up to quiet myself, and I'll put my hand in my ear, and I'll repeat whatever song I have in mind to do, and eventually when I get up to it, it's right there.
So I
usually do it with. I usually use Shabbos Zmiros songs. That's usually what I do for.
Now for instance, I'll tell you. Sometimes I do a Zmiros theme.
I almost exclusively do a Zmiros theme. It's a can't fail. Everybody knows the Zmiros.
Yes. However, again, the kunst is to be able to transition one melody to the other. Let's say Lecha Dodi. I sometimes do the classical old Yom Zeh Mechubad, the classical melody of let's say we got to Hisorari kivorech kumi uri shir dabei kvod Hashem olayich niglo lecha dodi likras kalo penei Shabbos nekablo. Watch lecha dodi likras kalo penei Shabbos nekablo lo sevoshi velo sikomi matish tochachi. But I picked the same key, something that flowed right into it. That's what I want to do. I don't want to, one was in major. And again, now, not everybody is a sophisticated musician, and I'm not such a sophisticated musician. Some people, the question I'm asking, what's minor, what's major, what's Fragish, what's this, what's that? But, I literally have created lists for myself of songs in minor, songs in major. And again, as I did this more and more, I prepared more and more. And I think, again, unless you're one of the few people who can daven at the last minute, if you're davening at the last minute, don't be too innovative there. Go with the standard. But if you want to do something a little bit more creative, then you need more time to prepare it.
All right. Mayor Davis, thank you very much for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
And is there any place where any of your materials are available?
Good question. Probably on YouTube. You can get, I've made a number of recordings. One was actually called Shabbat for Starters, which did very well and sold all over the world, but you can get it on YouTube, also on iTunes. It's the standard melodies of Zmiros and Kiddush and stuff like that. It's
a good thing for people who are just starting out.
It's actually it was.
Is it a tutorial or?
No, actually, it was not a tutorial. It took me 2.5 years in my spare time to do it. Oh. It was in theory very simple to do. It ended up being harder to do. It was all a cappella. I brought in ringers to do it. A lot of the stuff I had to do many takes of. There were two in Shabbat for Starters. Look for the Krakow Niggin by Karl Bach, and Deror Yikra, where I brought in, had 10 or 15 guys in my apartment in the city, had the lights low, I had warm soda and arbus and stale challah at the table, and I told my engineer, turn on the mic, and the mood was there, and it was magical. But it's the standard melodies like Yom Tov Mechubad and Sur Mishalo and Shalom Aleichem and Havdalah and Kiddush, and it went very well. And there's other things I've done too, but it was a lot of fun. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for being here, and Kol Tov.
Thank you.
My thanks to Mayor Davis for sitting down with us and sharing his vast knowledge of the Baal Tefilah. If you like this episode and would be interested in hearing more about davening for the Amud, let us know by reaching out to us on Twitter at Jewish_living or by sending us an email at jewishlivingpodcast@gmail.com. For now, have a great week and Kol Tov.
The Jewish Living Podcast is produced by Sroli Pikus. Our theme song is The Band by A.B. Rottenberg from Journeys 4. You can email the show at jewishlivingpodcast@gmail.com. You can also find us on Twitter at Jewish_living. The Jewish Living Podcast is recorded in conjunction with the Queen's Jewish Link.